Perfect. Thank you. It's great to be here. This is one of my favorite cities. I love Montreal. My name's Shawn Woods, and I'm a lettuce farmer. And it's been 8 years, but it still feels pretty cool to say that. I wasn't always a lettuce farmer. I used to be a banker. I lived in Ontario for 15 years working for a leading financial institution until one day it didn't quite feel right. I didn't love it anymore. It was a good job, paid well, but there was something missing. And being young and stupid, I thought the best thing to do is to quit that job. So I quit, and then I didn't know what I was going to do. So I thought, well, the next logical step here is I'll buy a one-way ticket to Bangkok, and I'll backpack across Southeast Asia, and surely I'll find some truth. So I did that, and that was fun. Went through Thailand and Cambodia. In Laos, I got on a motorcycle for the first time, drove it into Vietnam, up into Hanoi, drove all the way to Ho Chi Minh City in the south. And I loved that so much that I turned around and did it again. And it was on that adventure that a lot of things really I started to get some clarity. Because for the first time I saw people, lots of people, that by the way I would measure it would be poor, had no material possessions, very little. But I spent a lot of time with these folks, and I realized, wow, they eat really well. Their diet is incredible. And as a result, they're all fairly healthy people and very happy. And this was conflicting at the time because I came from a place where everybody had lots of money, most people were unhealthy, and hardly anybody was happy. And seeing the value that these farmers brought in their community and the value that fresh food brought to these people, I decided right then and there that when I went back to Canada, I would become a farmer. So I eventually got back to Canada, and I thought, how do I get going? How do I become a farmer? It's actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. But as luck would have it, about 5 minutes from my house, a farm had just opened up, a vertical farm. I had no idea what that was. But I thought maybe this is the way I can become a farmer. It seems like a real great way to go. So I called these guys at GoodLeaf. I said, GoodLeaf, what is this all about? And they said, well, we're vertical farmers. We grow leafy greens indoors, and we don't use any pesticides. I said, I've got two questions for you. One, can I have all the lettuce I want? They said, yes, of course. I said, when can I start? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey with GoodLeaf Farms and some of the amazingly cool things that I've learned along the way. I've been privileged to spend a lot of time with some really brilliant folks, and we've tried to do our best to use technology to promote sustainable agriculture. And I'm going to talk today about some of the things that we've learned. So at GoodLeaf Farms, we believe that everybody should have year-round access to fresh, delicious, nutritious leafy greens at an affordable, at a reasonable price. We started in Truro, Nova Scotia, or as we like to call it now, Silicon Valley North. That's where we've got our R&D facility. We built our first highly automated vertical farm in Guelph, Ontario in 2018. That's about a 45,000 square foot facility you see on the left, and it's highly automated. In 2022, we raised $150 million to expand the network. And late last year, we opened a new farm in Calgary, Alberta. And earlier this year, we opened one in Saint-Hubert, not too far from here. Those farms are each built in phases, but phase one is 100,000 square feet. And those new farms can do just shy of 2 million pounds of leafy greens a year, which is pretty cool. And who knows what vertical farming is? Show of hands. Okay, this is great. I would do this 5 years ago, and nobody knew what vertical farming was. This is not so much a presentation about GoodLeaf, but really how vertical farmers are using technology to overcome some of the challenges with producing food. And I think it's probably, if you guys understand vertical farming, I won't really get into what it is, but I'll tell you about some of the costs and the benefits. Obviously, it's an incredible capital cost to build these farms. Those new farms are $50 million a piece. And it's no secret we consume a lot of electricity. Because what's made vertical farming possible is LED lighting. Right? And that's finally, for the first time, you could have lights very close to crops without burning them. But the challenge is, of course, is a tremendous heat signature. You got to get that heat out of your grow room. So those are two of the biggest costs. And we'll talk about how we approach those later. But some of the benefits are we're able to drop these things anywhere. We can put these things in in industrial parks. We can put these things in deserts. We can put them up north. We're sort of land agnostic. And the cool thing is because we're growing multiple crops on the same square foot, because we've taken that grow assembly and stacked it multiple times 50 feet in the air, we're able to grow 10 crops on 1 square foot. And we plant incredibly densely, and we grow quickly, right? We're able to manufacture an environment that we think is ideal for the plants. So there's no clouds, there's no droughts, there's no pests. As a result, plants perform exceedingly well in those environments. Some of our microgreen crops only spend 4 days under the lights. Even some of the lettuces, are in there for 2.5 weeks. And because we can do this hyper-local, we can get the food to the customer very quickly. I was amazed to learn that a lot of the lettuce, actually 90-some% of the lettuce we eat in Canada comes from California or New Mexico. And that's a long drive. I've done that drive. That's like 5,000 kilometers to Montreal. Like, that takes forever. But here, growing near the consumer, we can get that food onto their plate quickly. And we can reduce the food miles associated with moving that product from California. One of the coolest things about what we do is water conservation. All of the water that we use for irrigation purposes, we recycle. We'll talk about that a little bit in a few slides. And I've heard a lot of talk at this conference about biodiversity and the need to grow different things. There was a conference yesterday where I learned the statistic that 60% of what humans eat are from 3 crops, right? The cool thing about vertical farming is in our farms, we're growing like 20 crops on an acre. And probably the thing that really resonated with me the most initially was we do this by using pesticides. And that is incredibly challenging. And we don't use no insecticides, no fungicides, no biocides, like no pesticides at all. That's very challenging. It's basically impossible to do that outdoors. The way we do it is following good manufacturing practice, so lab coats, hair nets, all those things. Washing hands, sanitizing surfaces. But controlling access to the grow chambers. That first farm we built in Nova Scotia was actually an old school, 75-year-old school. The gym was like our grow room. And we learned quickly that that was not ideal because we had to basically design our processes around the constraints of our facility. And we thought, we're not going to do that again. Next time, we're going to design our facility around the constraints of our process. So the grow room is like, the most secure area in our facilities, and very few people are allowed in there. Even the air that moves in and out of the grow room is filtered and hit with ultraviolet for disinfection purposes, even to make sure that the air that the plants get is super clean. And we employ a lot of cool, novel technologies for disinfection, whether that's disinfecting seeds or substrate or other inputs that come into the facility. Thermal is a great way. We use heat as a disinfection strategy. We're experimenting, and lots of vertical farms experiment now with cold plasma for seed treatment. We're using beneficial bacteria, so biostimulants, to make the plants healthy and really fend off some of the things that I didn't even realize were problems before I joined the farming world. Insects, I thought, sure, that's fairly obvious. We got to be vigilant to protect our facility from pests. But pathogens, plant pathogens, diseases that can make plants sick are omnipresent. And these are the big challenges. And because we recycle our water, that's one of the most important vectors to reduce this potential spread of pathogens. So we treat all of our water, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And the great part about being able to design these farms from the ground up is that you can design them for efficiency. And I've learned that the most sustainable path is usually the most profitable path. Sustainability and profitability go hand in hand. And up in that top picture is actually a picture of me standing in front of the grow room in 2018. We were building it, and you can see that our grow rooms are boxes inside of boxes. And some of the ways that we're more efficient, more sustainable, and how we save money is the LED technology. We use the next generation LEDs. They're incredibly efficient, and they continue to get more and more efficient. We do a custom spectrum, so often you get into a vertical farm and you'll see like these pink lights. That shocked me when I saw them the first time. But what that is really a mixture of red and blue LEDs, right? The spectrum that's ideal for vegetative growth. By stripping out the rest of the colors of the rainbow, we can be very efficient from a power perspective. And we have the opportunity, like that middle picture is the sun setting on the Calgary farm. And the picture on the bottom is the sun coming up in the grow room at the same time, right? We can burn electricity when it's relatively inexpensive, and so our lights are on all night. Another cool thing about the facility design is, and we learned it this year in Calgary, it was so cold out there. We take all the heat out of our grow rooms and move it throughout the rest of the facility. So even when it's minus 35 outside, we're reducing our reliance on natural gas because we're just moving the heat about our facility. Another cool thing I didn't realize before I started was that plants need CO2. So we actually buy CO2 and we pump it into our grow chambers. And I still just boggles my mind that plants take CO2 and convert it into oxygen. I think the plants are so cool. From a seeding perspective, everything we do is automated. And we're able to drop a precise number of seeds and precise locations on trays. And we've got real-time imaging technology that's sort of validating that always. So if the cameras will notice that we're either overseeding or underseeding, in real time they'll sort of wave a flag to the operator and say, hey, you may want to stop, recalibrate the equipment, check it out, because we don't want to underseed. You know, that real estate under lights is expensive, so we want to make sure the optimal product's going into the grow room at all times. One of the cool things we do, we use a lot of substrate, but we have partnerships with local landscapers and garden centers, so they take the substrate on the back end, they'll upcycle it, use it for their purposes, and they love this stuff because, again, it's nutrient rich, it's organic material, and it's got 0 pesticides in it. So we've got some really great relationships even from a waste stream perspective. But this, I think, is still one of the parts of vertical farming that I'm the most proud of. It's neat to forget, living in Canada, how precious water is, right? It's until you go to places where it doesn't just clean water flow out of the tap for free, it's easy to lose sight of it. But our farms are also water treatment facilities. To give you an idea of scale, like that's one of our new mechanical rooms. Like you can see those scissor lifts. Like those scissor lifts are, 8 feet tall. We've done a lot of work to understand, how water conscious are we? So we compared it to, our major competitor would be open field farming in California. So we compared how much water goes into a kilogram of lettuce in a traditional open field farm. And that blew my mind, like 250 liters of water for a kilogram of lettuce. And until you hear how much water goes into beef and other crops, that's a staggering statistic. But because we're able to recycle all the water that we use, we've got it down to about 11 liters of water per kilogram of lettuce. That's 95% more efficient than an open field farm. And it's obvious. I mean, we got an unfair advantage, right? The water that we give to our crops doesn't just seep into the ground and disappear. But it comes with a lot of challenges as well. So how do we do that? So there's a number of ways and a number of, again, super cool technologies that we use to make sure that the water we give our plants is as clean as the air we give our plants. You guys are all familiar with UV, I'm sure. That's a technology that a lot of farms are using. But ozone is a newer one. And ozone is a fascinating technology. So we have ozone generators in all of our farms generating ozone. And that ozone, we bombard the water with ozone. So ozone's an O3. And that ozone will actually search out and destroy any bacteria or organic load in the water, which is fascinating. And the cool thing about that is the byproduct of that reaction is an O2. And another thing I learned was that although the plants need CO2 to photosynthesize, their roots crave oxygen. Right? And if you're able to supersaturate the water that you irrigate with oxygen, the plants are incredibly happy. So the cool thing about ozone is not only does it give us incredibly clean water, it's a very strong oxidizer, but it also leaves incredibly high levels of dissolved oxygen in the water. Reverse osmosis is another one that we use. So we're employing a myriad of different technologies to keep the water clean. And even before we disinfect the water, we got to filter it. So the filtering technology these days is incredible. Different size membranes and different materials. And the ability to really, we get the water to near drinking water grade just from the filters alone, but then taking it that extra step and disinfecting it to know that it's safe, to know that we can continue to recirculate it. And another thing that's a great sustainability piece, but again, it's from a profitability perspective, it only makes sense, is all the water, like we talked about all the heat that's in those grow rooms. We got to get that heat out and redistribute it around the facility. But the even bigger challenge is the humidity. Right? You walk into one of these grow rooms, it's like walking out of an airport in the Caribbean. It's incredibly humid. And all that water has to be taken out of that grow room. So our air handlers are not just removing heat from our grow chambers, they're removing a lot of humidity. And we're taking that humidity from our air handlers and recycling it back into our irrigation water. I don't have the stat yet on the Montreal and Calgary facilities, but the Ottawa facility, that's a 45,000 square foot facility, we're stripping 12,000 liters of water every day out of the air in the grow room and putting it right back into the irrigation tanks. So it's those types of techniques that allow us to really be proud of how we're using water and promoting water conservation. And again, like this builds on the things I learned on my adventures to Vietnam, but local food production is so critical, right? Like having food grown near the people is paramount. And we got a good taste of this, during the pandemic, when all of a sudden the border shut down and those trucks full of lettuce are sitting at the border, right? Lettuce doesn't last very long. And it's even worse on the East Coast. It takes even longer to get it to us. In fact, when we first started, all of the produce that we grew in the Nova Scotia farm went to the good people of Newfoundland. For them to get it from California was near impossible. We would talk to some of our partners in the Dominion stores. They'd open up the cases from California, it would be half gone. They'd have to throw half it out, and the rest would be good for a couple of days. But by growing super close to the consumer, you can strip out that week of travel, and you get a lot of additional benefits from a shelf life perspective. And we've learned that fresh food is healthy food, right? The longer you wait post-harvest to test leafy greens, you'll notice that the nutrient levels drop off substantially. So it's critical to eat fresh food. Of course, growing it near the people enables us to reduce the CO2 footprint associated with moving those trucks across the country. And, right now we're blessed. We've got great trade with the States, and, they have a little bit extra lettuce to send our direction. But I'm always nervous, like what happens if they just decide that they want to be a little healthier? Right? These trends are happening. What if they say, yeah, we're all going to eat lettuce now? What happens to us? Right? If we don't produce it here, we may be in a bit of a pickle. So the idea of having access, year-round access to food for everybody, we think is important, and the ability to do it domestically we think is important. Right? Vertical farming is not without its challenges, but we think that if we start now, we'll definitely have this figured out when this becomes absolutely critical. And I'll talk a little bit about the value of freshness. Like we've explored all sorts of different technologies that will help with shelf life extension. We look at modified atmospheric packaging. We've looked at just packaging. The cool thing we're doing now is, and this is another cool example of how sustainability and profitability tie together so often. We had a plastic clamshell. You can kind of see them on that bottom picture. And that was, too much plastic. We weren't super thrilled about our plastic, despite the fact that it's 100% recyclable. It's got post-consumer content. It's actually got some renewable plant-based content. But it's still a lot of plastic. So we had a goal. By 2025, we want to reduce our plastic and our packaging by 25%. So we tried to figure out how do we do this, and can we do this in such a way that promotes freshness. And we learned that, you guys familiar with like microperfs? It's pretty cool technology. They can actually, using lasers, like put holes in packaging that allow optimal gas exchange. So you got oxygen going one way, CO2 going the other, and that promotes shelf life extension. And these things all taken together help reduce food waste. And just by taking the top from our old clamshell top to a flow wrap microperf, not only were we able to increase shelf life, we're able to reduce the plastic in the packaging by like 25%. So a great sustainable piece, of course, but that's 25,000 kilos of plastic in the Ontario farm alone. That's an incredibly profitable exercise. I always think it's so cool how so often sustainability and profitability go hand in hand. Another thing we learned about when you go down to Salinas, California, and you tour these farms, and you realize, holy smokes, like there's a lot of food waste. Sometimes the weather just doesn't go completely right. Lettuce may get tip burn. That crop just gets tilled into the field, right? That whole crop's gone. Now they till it in the field, and there's certainly some benefits to that, but that's food that could have fed people. In our farms, because we have hyper control over the weather, we don't have those challenges. But the other thing that's neat is we sort of grow to order, right? We don't have to grow a bunch of food and then sell a bunch of food. Because we're seeding and growing and harvesting every single day at our farms, we can get the product to the customers when they want it. Customers want to pick up on one day and Wednesdays and Fridays, that's no problem. We can do that. And they're going to tell us ahead of time what they want, and we can be incredibly rigid in the production planning such that we can deliver exactly what they want on the day that they want it. So these are some of the ways that vertical farming is able to use cool technologies to be more sustainable, to promote locally grown produce. And it's an awfully fun thing to do. And I would encourage you guys, like, I don't know, how many of you guys grow your own microgreens? All right, right on, beautiful. It's an incredible, rewarding experience. Yeah. And the nutrient density in microgreens, like this is something that we're just starting to understand now. Like they're incredibly dense nutrition. Like a pound of micro broccoli by some studies has as much as 40 times the vitamins and nutrients as like the mature flower, which is incredible. So they're easy to grow. They grow very quickly. And you guys can all grow them. Right? If you have a windowsill with some sunlight, or if you want to go out and invest in some lights, they're relatively inexpensive. The seeds are cheap. You can grow this stuff in paper towel in a lot of cases. And all of a sudden you can start experimenting with different plants that aren't necessarily indigenous to this part of the world because you're doing it inside. And because you're doing it inside, you don't have to use any pesticides. And now you're growing different mustards and different radishes and pea shoots and all the exciting lettuces. And the cool thing about doing this yourselves is you guys can grow things that don't make sense necessarily for us to do on a commercial scale. One of the neat things about growing indoors is we can reach out to our seed, breeding partners and distributors across the world and ask them, like, do you guys have a lettuce that used to do really well outdoors, but because of, for whatever reason, it's not resistant to drought or a new pest has come up that's no longer desirable? Right? We want to dip into their seed vaults and find things that are no longer being produced by open field farmers, but that served a purpose at one point in time. Maybe it's incredibly nutritious, or maybe it just tastes really good, or maybe it's just, a crop that's not very resistant to drought. Well, these are the things that we can grow, and you guys can take it a step further. You guys can grow things that maybe don't make sense to grow on a commercial perspective because the yields just aren't there, or the cycle time's too long. And I grow things at home that we can't grow in the farm, and that is very exciting because all of a sudden you and your family are going to be eating products that you're not able to buy in the stores, and you're going to know that you grew them yourselves in your home with no pesticides, with a little bit of water and sunlight. So I would encourage everybody. There's actually some really cool folks downstairs that have like little microgreen kits. You can just buy these things, the seed and the substrate, everything's in those kits. I'd implore you to go get some of these things and start experimenting with it, because as soon as you start growing your own food and feeding your family and your friends, it's a pretty cool thing. So that's it for me. Thank you guys for paying attention and participating with me here today. We've got a couple minutes. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Do you see GoodLeaf Farms moving beyond the leafy green category and maybe going into other types of vegetables, or
Yeah.
partnering with local other types of producers to develop kind of like other types of durable development agriculture, or contributing to the movement?
100%. That's a wonderful question. I should have touched on that. Not only can we can emulate any environment that exists in the world, right? So we can grow things that aren't indigenous to Canada, certainly. And we can also manufacture environments that don't exist anywhere in the world. Right? We can have the equivalent of 2 suns with no clouds, and it rains all the time, like whatever you can imagine, and unnatural levels of CO2 if you wanted. You can really supercharge these plants. And we've learned that you can start to influence the plants to do different things, right? You could grow conceivably a kale with more iron content than a traditional kale, right? So if you had iron deficiency, this kale would be magical for you, and it's something that couldn't necessarily be grown outdoors anywhere in the world. We've experimented with different specialty plants. No, not always in the leafy green categories. We've experimented with lots of different things. The dream really is like biofortification, right? And this has massive implications in, like, pharma, for instance. I'll give you a great example. A lot of pharmaceutical companies would love to, a lot of their medicinal plants that they're using, they're sourcing from all over the world. Saffron's a great example. Some of the best saffron comes from Iran, but a lot of these guys can't deal with Iran. They'd like nothing more than to have a saffron facility co-located with their pharma facilities. But to these guys, you think about the value of stripping that complexity and logistics out of that supply chain, right? Having to rely on, weather changing and shipping logistics is very challenging. So it's a great question. The reason we're focused on leafy greens is because it's not easy, but it's a relatively straightforward thing for us to produce indoors. And we feel that by doing that indoors, it takes some of the burden off some of the crops that we can't yet grow indoors, right? People are working on strawberries, people are working on peppers, but for us, like, peppers are great in a greenhouse. Almost all the peppers we eat come from greenhouses. Like, they're doing a great job, right? Well, and there's a lot of that in Canada. So we don't want to compete with necessarily Canadian farmers. Like, we love the idea of taking the market share away from the guys in California. That's a great question. We got a minute. Anybody have another one?
What was the hardest to automate step in the automated facility?
Oh, man. I'll tell you, the thing we learned about automation, and our new facilities, I would say, are a little less automated than the Ontario facility, because we just automated, thought we'd just automate everything. But one thing we learned was that humans and robots don't play very well together, right? So our grow rooms are so automated that as soon as you open the door, all the robots stop. They have to, for safety. You just can't be in the same room with these things. And that's a real challenge, because all of a sudden you want humans to go in and monitor your crops, but you have to shut the robots down to do that, and now you're not as efficient. So in some cases, we actually de-automated parts of our facility. We took the robots out and we put people in. Right? We cross-trained these people to do the horticulture observations that they would have to do, that they would do prior to that, but again, they'd have to shut down the robots to do it. So now we have humans doing some of the jobs that robots used to do, which is fascinating. But yeah, the automation, the lifting technology is pretty incredible, because the weights that these things are lifting and the precision. We've got one robot on one side of the grow room that puts benches in, and he works in conjunction with a robot on the other side that takes benches out simultaneously. So it's the coordination of that automation that can be sometimes very challenging. That's a good question. We got 10 seconds. Anybody want to get another one in? Yep. Yeah, so that's another excellent question. We buy our CO2 from a vendor in a national vendor, and I know that I've had these conversations with them. They source their CO2 from a number of different industries. So I know that a lot of CO2 produced in the oil and gas industry down in southern Ontario is recaptured, and these guys are using some of that to offset some of the other sources of CO2. But the cool thing about using CO2 is it does hold this promise, like eventually we're going to get there, once humans figure out energy, that this could be a carbon neutral or even negative endeavor, right? Because you're, again, pumping that CO2 into these grow rooms to switch it into oxygen. So we're very excited about what the future holds. We're not quite there yet, but we're super stoked about the way this is going. I think I'm now way over time. I'm not really sure how this timer works. But anyway, thank you very much, guys. I'm going to stick around, see if you have any questions. I'm here.